Okay, so it's my great pleasure to be speaking to Adah Parris today. Adah, you know what? Usually people kind of would go over your background and stuff, but I don't actually have your bio up right now. So I'm just going to say that Adah has a fantastic website, and I know that is adahparris.com. Am I right? Let's unmute you at this point. Yeah, there we go. And so I'll invite you to say a little bit about your background in just a second. But the topic for tonight, cyborg shamanism, which is really a rather new concept. The earliest mention you can find of it on the internet is an article by Adah in July 2019, I believe. So really of these times, but it seems it's inspired a lot of interesting thoughts and connections, even over those few months. So it's certainly a conversation I'm really looking forward to. So Adah, I'd just invite you to tell us a little bit about who you are and what your background is before we sort of dig into the content of the evening.
Wow. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. Hello, everybody. First of all, Stephen, I think that this is a conversation that's been a long time coming between the two of us. Mm-hmm. We have, orbited each other's worlds for several years, so I'm glad that we get the opportunity now. Background. What do? I wear many hats. So, I'm some labels of tech futurist, but I take a philosophical, anthropological look at tech rather than trying to predict the future. Artist. So, I see life as art and we're all trying to create different things. Systems designer, I suppose that what's at the heart of everything that I do is that I'm curious and I have a sense of wonder and awe. My mother would say that as a child, I was a social justice warrior. So the things that would make me cry is injustice. I could probably deal with most other things, but the thought of injustice and seeing that in front of me is something that's always driven me. And so now I suppose I'm a storyteller who doesn't have a particular medium. So whether I'm on stage, giving a talk, or the virtual stage, giving a talk, or I'm producing immersive learning development experiences, or I'm making headdresses or what have you, I've finally got to a place where I can bring all the different sides of me together. So I've always been into science and the idea of quantum physics. I may not understand it all, but I knew that there was something there. And I've always been a person who loves nature and the forest and spirituality and all of these things. And growing up, I suppose that I always thought that I had to keep them separate. And so I would dive into one thing and then come up and go into something else. And now with Cyborg Shamanism, it's given me the ability to bring all of those different worlds together in a way that makes me feel, I suppose, complete, or not complete, but whole. I feel more myself now than I have done for, I think, any other time in my life.
Great, thank you. That's a really touching introduction. We'll start moving towards some of the content, I guess. So I actually took some notes, which I think I might as well share actually, just in case people kind of want to follow along in some way. So there's a link to a Notion page there. So these are features of the key articles that Adah has written about cyborg shamanism and refers to. But something I'd love to start with is just some kind of basic definitions, in your mind, in your words, for both cyborg and then shaman or shamanism. So let's go with cyborg first. What do you understand by the term cyborg?
Well, to me, I suppose the whole idea of cyborg was really about asking ourselves, what does it mean to be human? That we as humans have always augmented ourselves with something that's external to us, whether it's, so for me, I wear glasses. So it's something that we have used, So if I take a step back, I see technology as a tool. Technology is not the answer, it's a tool, and it's something that we use to help us gain a sense of enlightenment or to augment ourselves in some way. And so, for me, a cyborg is somebody that uses technology to augment themselves, and we've gone from it being these physical things to, you know, and you helping us to see better or to, you know, perform better, to actually now it's starting to move into, well, I was just about to throw myself down a rabbit hole. I caught myself just in time. I was like, we are using, at the moment, we seem to be moving towards using algorithmic technology as a means of enhancing our intelligence and our capacity for thought. And actually with shamanism is, to me, is about actively seeking other ways of knowing. So it, you know, and that could be through plant medicine, it could be through spirituality, it could be through quantum physics. It's this other way of knowing. And actually, the whole thing came about by recognizing that both, all of, at first it was those two worlds, and recognizing that those two worlds were doing the same thing, using a tool, whether that's algorithmic technology or hardware or using plant medicine, to gain a sense of enlightenment, to reach up to something else. And so it was this idea, understanding that we're all trying to do the same thing, but from different viewpoints, and that it's about connecting with ourselves, each other, and our environment. And so I just looked at that and thought about, if the behavior is the same and the tools are different, then bring those together. And so now I see that maybe cyborgs are a form of shamanism as well. It's a technological shamanism. And so, you know, the recognizing that all of these things are interconnected.
Yeah. But we've gone a long way in there. That's which is great. You know.
So right, I will back.
Yeah, well, something I found interesting. So it seems like you're rather inspired by Amber Case. You referred to her a few times.
Yeah.
And I hadn't heard of her actually previously, but I love that sort of little TED talk.
Yeah, I met her once and we had a conversation, and she introduced herself as a cyborg anthropologist, and instantly I was like, oh my God. What is this?
That's the coolest label I've ever heard.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Something that I found interesting in her writing is that she says, for thousands of years, everything's been a physical modification of self. It's helped us to extend our physical selves, go faster, hit things harder, and there's been a limit on that. But now what we're looking at is not an extension of the physical self, but an extension of the mental self. And she's referring, of course, to like information technology and smartphones and so on. And because of that, we're able to travel faster and communicate differently through the use of technology. And I was really like interested by this, suggesting there's been a not just a quantitative but like qualitative shift in the type of cyborgism, if you like. You know, it's not because so if we're talking about cyborgism as simply the kind of like the use of technology or the merger of human and technology, then it goes all the way back. I mentioned to you on the call that we had a couple of days ago, like, you know, like really all the way back, like mitochondria were originally like respiring bacteria outside of eukaryotic cells. And as far as we know, the theory of symbiogenesis from the amazing Lynn Margulis, you know, the eukaryotic cell kind of took up the mitochondrial cell, basically, you know, as a kind of technological leap in some way.
That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. And that's exactly, well, to me, that's the point. And that's what I've been looking at, that all of these things are connected. So the manifestation of cyborgs with tech, you know, algorithmic tech right now, it's not anything new. We've been doing it before, you know, we've been doing it, you know, back in caveman times. It occurs in nature. And I suppose all I've done is recognize those patterns and recognize those connections, and have been able to find a language to bring some of that thinking together.
Yeah, but so it certainly seems there is a kind of new kind of cyborgism in this way in which it's really our minds have this capacity to kind of join with other minds, or even to kind of affect physical reality in some sense, or with the right kinds of devices. But that's
right.
Well, exactly, and I was going to say, and that makes it easier to see the link with shamanism, because many shamanistic tools are, you know, alter our consciousness and our psychology in a way which is kind of makes the links more transparent than if a caveman picks up a club and, you know, and then saying, well, what's what could be the link with that, with ayahuasca or whatever it might be. Yeah.
But I suppose I have especially now, started looking at the intentionality of things. So what's the intention behind that connection? What's the intention behind using that plant or that club or what have you, or that 360 camera? What's the intention? And is it to create this sense of connection? And that's, and so if it's about creating a sense of connection and a sense of explaining or trying to understand ourselves as humans in relation to everything else that is bigger than us, then the tools, in some ways don't matter, because it's not they don't matter, but I think it becomes more about personal choice in which tools you use.
Yeah.
Because they're going to get you to where you want to. They have the potential to get you to where you want to be.
Yeah, I was interested in some kind of place that you put emphasis so far as shamanism goes. Well, you say most of us recognize a shaman as someone who's dedicated to serving others and something bigger than ourselves. I assume you mean serving something bigger than themselves there. Yeah, and I think some would. Yeah, I think it's maybe not necessarily the first thing that people would jump to when they think of shaman. Like most lay people would probably think a shaman is someone that takes crazy drugs or dances around fires or something like this. And but of course, yeah, if the more you read and the more you understand, of course, the reason for shamans typically entering these kind of trance states or altered states is for this. It's in service of the community, and that gives that. I think the way you start with that in cyborg shamanism shows that it seems to indicate your desire that this is an ism that is about service and is actually is seeking to help.
Yeah, well, I mean, the way that I have looked at it is that I was brought up Catholic. I went to convent school and church every Sunday, Catholic church with the priest and everything, and that is a form, the priest is a form of service. It may not be one that I necessarily agree with or follow, but it's still a sense of service. And so that is how the more I started to look at all of these things, was recognizing that they may be called different things, but the pattern and the behavior and the desire and the sense of community and communing and understanding ourselves and trying to create this. I think we're all curious. We're all curious about ourselves and life, and there are different ways of getting there, and that's all that I've trying to understand. And that maybe cyborg shamanism is an ism that helps us. And I'm very aware that the patterns that I saw are my patterns. They may not be for everybody else, but it may be a way of, I suppose the way that I look at it now is that I am using this or trying to put this out there to help people recognize their own patterns, and maybe that's my service.
Interesting. Okay, so I mean, so there's a link between shamanism and service that from ism.earth. You also say the word shamanism is used as a call to actively seek and find other perspectives, other ways of knowing, because they need to be heard and included if we are to be truly successful and sustainable on a systems level. So that's a little bit different there. There's the service aspects, and then there's also this kind of seeking and questioning aspect, both of which I think are kind of true and useful. And
that's the thing with, I launched the idea. It took 5 years, nearly 6 years for me to recognize the patterns and then to start talking about it. And so, I've never been fixed with what it's going to be. It's just been an idea. First of all, it was some ideas some patterns that I recognized. And the more that I spoke to other people, I'm not an expert in all of these worlds, but the more that I spoke to other people, so speaking to a quantum physicist and speaking to shaman and speaking to other people, and cyborgs, people who have, hardware technology in their chests, and understanding their reasoning for it, and then being able to just connect the dots, has helped to shift it and shape it. And I think it's something that will continue to shift, because it's more than me. This is about many of us just understanding and recognizing patterns, and somebody else may see a pattern somewhere else and recognize it in another world that I haven't even thought of or looked at. And so having those conversations just means that, again, it shifts. It's fluid.
Yeah, and that one of the key, or perhaps the key aspect of that pattern, or the pattern that unites the cyborg world with the shamanistic world, is this quest for connection. I love how you tell the story that you kind of, and well, maybe I'll let you do it. You know how you had this. Oh, you had this like moment where it's like, okay, yeah, each of these communities are seeking to connect with self, other, and and the natural world. And maybe you can sort of just explain
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So at the time, I was working as a tech futurist for a company, and I was putting on an event on transhumanism. And I had, so up prior to this point, a bit of context, I had been to Burning Man, I had been in various shamanic practices, I'd been, lots of different worlds. And I was organising this event with a guy called Livu, who may be on here. And he has a piece of hardware implanted in his chest. And what it does is that when it detects magnetic north, it vibrates. And so, short way of describing it is that it essentially turns him into a compass. So you can navigate yourself. And I said to him, well, why this and why are you putting this into your body? And he said, well, as humans, we may have lost some of that sense. It's the senses that certain birds and mammals have. There are Aborigine tribes who can do that themselves. And so this is future human. To me, this is future human. It's helping me to understand myself and connect with my senses. It's helping me to connect with the earth. It's helping me to connect with my community because there are a group of people who have this. And I said, but you're saying the same thing or very similar thing that people who go down the shamanic path would say. Mm-hmm. And so then we had this conversation and it just started to go from there.
Yeah, I love that actually. And I think that's, I personally hadn't sort of looked at at least a couple of those aspects of cyborgism, if I can call it that, before. Like I get that, like that there was this like kind of future human transhumanism thing of people wanting to kind of like develop all these new superpowers, but the fact that of course there's a community been built around this, and now people like enjoy sharing. I've put a chip in here, well I've put a chip in here, and I've got this power and I've got that power. Is like that is it's a way of actually not just connecting with self but with other people. And then finally the fact, well, at least in the instance or the example that you gave about actually being able to detect the Earth's magnetic field, that is, it struck me as a really beautiful way of becoming more deeply in tune, in an almost literal sense, with nature and the wild. And I've absolutely heard people say very similar things about why they would go on, ayahuasca retreats and so on. And clearly, there's a very strong like medicine community around those substances. Yeah.
And it's interesting because when I first started talking about this, some people, when I mentioned the cyborgs, there were some people who were on the shamanism side and that spirituality side that just went, you can't, no, that's wrong. Putting technology into your body is absolutely wrong. You shouldn't go down that because we as humans should be able to do that naturally. And I'm of the mind that let people choose what's right for them. Because what I see through this is that none of these there's no hierarchy based on these technologies or these tools. They're different. And, I've been through this process of thinking, well, this is the answer, right, I'm going to do this and this is the answer and the next one and this is the answer. And actually for me, it's a combination of those things. And I'm just asking people to, to open up to the possibilities that there are other ways of doing things and to step outside of our bubbles and to question ourselves and to go into these other spaces and see see what patterns you can see and see how you can make that relevant to your own life.
So you mentioned that some of the plant medicine people perhaps are a bit skeptical of the cyborg stuff. What has been your experience of the cyborg's reaction to plant medicine? Are they a bit more open to that, or is that still a bit like
interestingly, most of this is anecdotal, but most of the cyborgs that I know have and probably continue to dabble in plant medicine, and they see it as they're complementary, but I suppose at the time they had seen it as it's a very personal thing.
Yeah,
it's what they're doing. It's an extension and not necessarily always, or maybe I haven't had the conversation, made the connection between they're doing the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. And so,
But that reminds me of the work of Carl H. Smith and the Cyberdelic Society, which is my first introduction to all of you.
yeah, actually, I think I spotted Carl on the call here as well.
Yeah,
It seems appropriate then, given we've spoken about cyborgism and shamanism in the abstract, then
yeah.
to ask you, Adah, like, do you consider yourself a cyborg or a shaman, or indeed, like, what is your own experience, in both of those worlds?
I am a human
Mm-hmm.
who is curious about other ways of knowing, and I see life as an experiment, as a series of experiments, and I'm curious about where those experiments can take me. Yeah, where those experiments can take me. Um, my own experience has been a long and interesting one of um, yeah, it's been an interesting journey of discovery. Um, I know people in many of those worlds who have gone on those journeys to explore different plants. Some of the plants have been, well, a plant that I know of has been iboga,
Mm-hmm.
um, and that's been a very interesting relationship in understanding that. I suppose as somebody that recognizes patterns, has always recognized patterns. Um, some experiences then help you to see more clearly. I see that when people talk about doing, I'm going to do inner work, I see that these things they turn the floodgates on. They're not the actual work. For me, they're not the actual work. They turn the floodgates on and they open things up. The actual work is what comes after. And if one was to take iboga, which then opens you up to recognizing that everything is connected and being able to see more patterns, then it's about a choice. It's a choice about what does one do with that information. What does one do? And one could decide that actually one is going to follow that journey and explore the patterns and try and see how what that means. So recognizing more and more things means that one is able to recognize patterns in different worlds and get this sense of connectivity, understand oneself more.
Mm-hmm.
Is that me? Understand oneself more. I'm being a little bit vague, I think.
So,
But
something which has really struck me about your writing is that you really emphasize that these technologies, or these the kind of experience of these technologies is not an end in itself. That, and as you just put it there, it's like they can kind of open the floodgates, if
yeah,
you like. They can, but the work is something a little bit different. So
yeah.
this seems important to me. So I'm curious, like, if you can speak a little bit more about that, and just say, like, well, if the actual kind of experience of iboga or ayahuasca or whatever, or even like having some kind of implant is not the work, then what are we talking about when when we talk about the work?
So using these various technologies, plants, what have you, I think that what they can do is that they can open us up to be able to see things more clearly. And then, so I know of people who've had some very profound experiences where they have, some will say they've seen their higher self, or some will say that they have been on a journey of recognizing the plant and how the plant came through from caveman times to Africa, to Egypt, to Victorian England, and seeing the journey of the plant that comes through, and understanding that it's been a continuous journey, and understanding that when you see those things, you can't forget them.
Mm-hmm.
You can't forget them, and they will have a profound effect on your life. And it's then what do you do with that information? Do you decide that I'm going to take some more, I'm going to go down that path again, I'm going to go and take some more plant medicine to go and see and explore and understand? For me, it's different. For me, it's been the floodgates were open and I can't unsee the things that I've seen. Mm-hmm. And so then I made a conscious decision about the fact that what it's enabled me to do is to see patterns, and to see those patterns clearly, and to be able to have language, to be able to communicate and say, well, this is what this is, and recognize them in sometimes in worlds that are polar opposites. And so my work has been, the inner work that I'm talking about, my work has been to continue to just recognize those patterns, and not necessarily be able to understand what they mean straight away, which is why this whole period took 5 years, but being able to map them. So what I did is I created a mind map, and just, whenever a word would pop up or an idea or a vision or something, it would go on the mind map because I didn't quite know what it was. But then over a period of time, I would go back and, I'd look at something and say, that's how it connects. So most people who know me have known that I am awake at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and they'll just say, oh, you don't sleep. Why are you awake those hours of the morning? But the reality is, and that, you and I had this conversation, the reality is that that's when, in that hypnopompic state, just before, sleeping and waking up, generally it's between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm aware that I'm waking up, and there is a word or an idea or a vision, or I've seen a connection or something, and it just happens. It's always in that time between 3 and 4 in the morning. And as I'm waking up, I tend to be repeating the word so that I don't forget it when I'm actually awake. And so, but that time it's been interesting because that has been how this whole cyborg shamanism bit came about, because it was between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, regardless of what time I went to bed. 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, I would wake up and have a word or an idea, or, some words I'd never even heard before. And I would go, why? I don't understand. But rather than try and understand it, I would add it to the mind map, and then probably stay up and try and do a bit of research to understand what that idea was. And that is how cyborg shamanism has happened and come together. And that, I would say, is linked to, understanding and experiencing different technologies.
Yeah. What I'm coming to understand is that it's something like an emergent pattern. And that more than it is something that has been, or that can even be pinned down too much to first principles. Like I kind of, which, because I asked you, well, let's define cyborgism, let's define shamanism, but it doesn't quite work like that. Is the feeling that I get from it, and you've mentioned your mind maps, and another thing that you gave me a sneak peek of is the kind of A to Z of cyborg shamanism, and it feels to me it's something that it's something that you get. You more get a feeling of, like, through kind of immersing yourself in your writings, and probably soon the writings of others, and like a community of people that are kind of involved in these practices, more than it is something that you're necessarily going to kind of find in a dictionary, or can use.
So the A to Z came about because I wanted to be able to find the language to get it out and express it, because it had been mulling around, and sometimes my brain was so full, it would feel like there's ants, and I was like, oh my God, I just need to get it out. And so a friend suggested a creative writing exercise, which is you write the A to Z of whatever the idea is, but you start at A and you don't move to B until you've worked out what A is. So you have to work through it chronologically. And I thought, oh, I can knock this out, I'll get it. But no, it didn't work like that. A lot of the time, it took weeks. It took weeks, and a lot of the time it would be in those 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning moments where I'd wake up and go, that's the word that connects. So A, anthropomorphic, B, balance, curiosity, diversity, experimental. And it would be that word links all those different worlds. So algorithmic technology and shamanism and all of these things. And so it was just the creation of first of all an A to Z.
Mm.
And then that has now moved into what is the story what's the journey that takes you on? So how do you go from having these ideas or looking at the isms or looking at this big idea, and what are the steps that you go through to get to that point of solving a problem or creating a community or all of those things? What's the as a friend calls it, what's the anatomy of transformation?
Mm. Nice. And it seems to me also we might say that cyborg shamanism is as much kind of in the links and the relationships between all of those different words in the A to Z as it is. The C is not even cyborg and the S is not even shamanism, right? That's a good example. It's like it's in those relationships that you start to sort of see it popping up.
I mean, L is liminal, and we're in a liminal space right now. The coronavirus has created this liminal space. What was happening before was a lot of us were focused on the past and being nostalgic or trying to predict the future and going forward, and not many people would be in the present. And as devastating and as it has been and continues to be, the coronavirus has also put us all in this liminal space in between what we used to know and what we could have.
Yeah, I actually noticed that you almost you set a bit of a prophecy in this sense, right? if I'm not incorrect.
I don't know if I did that.
I was looking at the dates of your articles, and you actually said, I'm pretty sure. Let's see if I can find this.
Not yet, Isabel. Sorry, I was just saying it's not yet. It's not available yet. I'm working out how to write that.
So actually, maybe this was just as lockdown started then, actually. But in the coronavirus and being human, you say we will have little choice but to spend time with ourselves, immersed in our own thoughts, feelings, stepping into the shadows of our existence, to reconnect our external stories and our internal senses, feelings and behaviors. So I'm pretty sure there's another reference to kind of just needing to kind of like go inside and
I mean, so that the coronavirus and being human was written, I think, at the beginning of March, and I think I'd been talking about the fact that we need to go into those silences and those spaces. So, one of my favorite quotes is by Claude Debussy, which is music is the silence between the notes, and without those silences, it's just noise. And I felt that a lot of us are just distracting ourselves with all sorts of stuff, and not. Because we know that without it, it's just noise, and we need, so actually within those silences is beauty. The Kogi tribe, the way that they, nurture their young people is that they go into a cave, they immerse themselves into the darkness for 9 years. And when, so it's total sensory deprivation. And when they come out, when they emerge, they have this different connection with the world. In the first article, I talk about escaping Plato's cave. So there's always been, I think, in everything that I've done, there's always been this sense of we need to go into the darkness to understand what is going on, and that starts with us.
I've actually found it now. It was in the interview that you did, Not Your Status Quo, Cyborg Shamanism, its creator, conversation with Adah Parris. That's dated February 2020, and in that article you say there was a lot to be learned about ourselves and each other in those moments of silence, boredom, and chaos. So I think that so there you go. You saw it coming, or feeling that something like that was going to be necessary. So, maybe just I know a little bit about this, but I wondered if you want to say anything about how you spent these last few months and say something about coronavirus.
So I have been shielding. I had a car accident about 20 something years ago, and my spleen burst, and so I'm in that really high compromise, immunocompromised group. And my GP rang me actually and told me I was out, and my GP rang me and said, no, you need to stay and you need to shield. And most people would see me as an extrovert, but I'm actually an introvert. And so I'm okay. I'm great with being in my own space, because that's where I get my energy. But I decided to, rather than look at this as a lockdown, a quarantine, I decided to look at this as a period of metamorphosis and, and transformation. And so I did, the usual things at the beginning. Right, I'm going to learn a new language. I'm going to learn to knit. I'm going to sketch every day. I'm going to do all these things. did I? Heck, I didn't do any of them. I didn't do any of them. I've got sketch pads, I've got everything. 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. It's still sitting there with the outside edge done. And this is what, 12 weeks later, I haven't done it. But what I have done is I decided to be very present for myself every day. So every morning I woke up, and whatever I felt, I gave myself permission to feel that. So, I might get up and I'm like, right, yes, I'm feeling great today. And I've got Zoom meetings and I'm going to wear a work top and sparkly hot pants. Great. Or I just feel like I need to cry and I need to just, the waves are coming. And so it always started with being present for myself and looking for ways, not looking, actually I didn't look. I know what self-care looks and feels like for me. And it could be one day I'm doing an Anapana meditation and the next day it's sound meditation. But knowing that I had to be physical as well. So I started doing yoga. I don't have much patience for exercises, but I decided I needed to do it because it's also great for my mental health and well-being. And it also gave me the space to take a step back from Cyborg Shamanism in a way, and to really look at, get that helicopter view, because workaholic, I've been guilty of running around and trying to do everything, and actually being able to step back and connect with people, make time for that.
Yeah, and I mean, and you are, we are all very grateful that you've now passing some of those gifts into the world. And if I can say, like, as my impression is that you have worked hard over a number of years, and you seem very well connected in the kind of business and corporate space, and but you are making a kind of important philosophical contribution now, and yet you didn't use the word philosopher in your introduction, but like I think you could now.
Thank you. It's another one to add. I mean, it's interesting, the business world. So it's interesting the way that the business world has adopted this, or have opened their arms to this. Because when I first started talking about cyborg shamanism, people said, don't talk about it, it's too crazy, your corporate clients won't want to work with you, it's too hippie, it's all of these things. And people said that, oh, you're really brave talking about this, because you're disrupting the way that people do things and the way that the system operates. And I said, well, I'm just asking questions and asking people to think a little differently as a starting point. And it's been a great experience, a beautiful experience, to meet people in worlds that I probably thought weren't thinking like this. So I've done a lot. I spent a year traveling around the world, speaking at big tech conferences and innovation conferences about cyborg shamanism, and I was like, wow. But the last one I spoke at, before the lockdown, was in Dubai, a big tech conference in Dubai, on the main stage, innovation and money stage. I'm talking about cyborg shamanism, but the way that I'm doing it is I'm talking about ancient wisdom and new thinking, future innovations, the fact that none of these things are new, none of the technologies, none of the ideas that we're talking about are new. I'm just applying, in the process of applying to do a PhD in this. And the question that is front of mind is about, or the topic that's front of mind is about the decolonization of technological innovation. The fact that these ideas that people are stamping as their own and making millions out of, in Silicon Valley and wherever, those ideas aren't new. They're not new. And, that they come from nature, they come from indigenous cultures, they come from ancient wisdom, they come from all these other places. And all I'm saying is, give credit where credit is due, because this is, they come from these other places. And what that means is, the way that it is starting to manifest itself is that if you want to solve a problem, you need to bring people who have that understanding around the table. So why not have, if you're talking about the future of education, why not have a shaman and, an indigenous elder and a policyholder and, you know, a neuroscientist around the table, because ultimately people are using their tools to try and achieve the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things came up for me there as you were speaking. First of all, certainly on the West Coast in California, my experience and understanding is there is a very good, or let's say, you know, frequent use of plant medicines, even within the kind of tech sort of entrepreneurship scene. That those worlds are already thoroughly entangled.
But to what purpose? To what end?
Well, indeed, exactly, and that's why I think you're offering something, you know, useful. One of the useful things I think you're offering through cyborg shamanism is to, you know, raise that very question of like these technologies are not an end in themselves, and if you're using one technology, say plant medicines, simply to further another technology, say making the latest iPhone, it's like you're kind of just going around in circles. You're not actually going anywhere.
But at some point, you're going to spin yourself out.
Right. Yeah. So, what's the other thing that came to mind? No, it's gone now. But so I wanted to just touch on another one of your articles before I forget, which is, and it kind of speaks to, I guess, how the kind of application or fruits of cyborg shamanism. Cyborg shamanism is a new manifesto for women, and I love. There's one paragraph in here that really struck me. I choose to look back to the power and to the collective wisdom of our ancestors, those indigenous women, the griots, the priestesses, the voodooists, the hoodooists, the manang, the witches, the oracles, the gida, the shipibo, the shaman, the crones, the indigenous grandmothers, and many others from across the diaspora, which, I mean, and I encourage people to go and check out the full article, but this was this gave me a kind of real kind of practical sort of taste of what cyborg shamanism could look in a particular domain. So I was wondering, would you mind sort of giving us a bit of an idea about that article and where you're at with that thinking now?
Yeah. So that cyborg shamanism, a manifesto for women, was written. I was actually commissioned to write a piece, to write something about it for International Women's Day this year, and you know, at the heart of cyborg shamanism is this thing about diversity and inclusion. How do you bring those other voices around the table? How do we bring those voices to collectively solve problems? And you know, looking at the fact that I was looking at ancestral wisdom, you know, I wanted it to be a rallying cry for women to say, you know, that we can actually come together and solve some of these problems. You know, and so the practical application of cyborg shamanism, what's happening now, is, you know, creating spaces in the online and offline world where I'm bringing people together to solve problems. So I did last November the Tate Modern commissioned me as an artist to host a roundtable discussion on cyborg shamanism. But the question they asked was, what's the design? How do you keep the design of future tech human? And so what I did is I used the A to Z as a framework, and I brought, you know, it was part of their Tate Lates, and so anybody could turn up at a 4-hour discussion, but I'd created this framework. And we had, you know, an elderly artist and a guy who'd just been released from prison that day, and all sorts of people who just passed through and joined part of the conversation. And, you know, creating this space for them to share their own relationship with technology and their own relationship. So somebody would say, well, I use the mobile phone to give me balance. And somebody would say, well, I use the Bible to give me balance. And recognizing that there's no hierarchy, they're both achieving the same thing or striving for the same thing. So at the end of the conversation, what happened was that everybody around the table had decided that they're going to create a manifesto for the design of future technologies that represented all of them, that would be human. That would mean that anybody who would design future tech would have to sign up to the manifesto, because then they felt included. Another example is that I had been working with, just before the lockdown, some artists and activists in Costa Rica to look at climate change in Costa Rica. And I just used the framework as a means of inquiry. So bringing those people, the different people, the different voices, the different knowledge and wisdom around the table to say, what is happening in Costa Rica in terms of climate change? What is the local knowledge, the indigenous knowledge, the ancestral knowledge that we have here that might be able to solve some of that? And that would have been a 5-day retreat, going to different locations and actually exploring what that means to come up with some ideas.
Thank you. I've seen we've passed the Q2 mark now, so it might be a good time to look at some of the questions that might have popped up, although perhaps people have been too engrossed. That's sometimes my experience with these things. So I will let me post the link again in case some of you didn't get it.
Oh, I closed Slido, didn't I?
There we go. So I've just posted a link to Slido. There you can post and upvote questions. So we'll just give people just a couple of minutes just to put in any questions that you might want us to speak to there, and upvote any that look interesting to you. And I'll also post again a Notion page with some of the links and quotes that I've researched over the past days, including links to Adah's site. So actually, don't link to your own site there, Adah. I'll put that in at the top of the document.
So I see one of the questions: what concerns might you or others have around implants and the state of surveillance? Big question. Implants. Let's tackle the implants first. We've always been implanting or ingesting or putting something onto or into ourselves. I personally have concerns about the ethics of a lot of what's happening now. Who's making it? What is it transmitting data? What are the ethics of that? Who owns that? What does it do to your body? There's not enough information around some of it, and I do worry. Would I put the implant that Livu has in his chest into my chest? Probably not. But people have pacemakers and cochlear implants, and I'm sure that when they were introduced and said that they were going to save people's lives or augment them, that people would look and go, oh my God, that's, what is this? So I think that it may be sometimes some of these things are too early for a lot of us to really recognize the benefits of that, or or to make those choices. But again, it comes down to individual choice. And in terms of surveillance, I mean, we're watched all the time. We're watched all the time, and I don't think it's going to get any better, and that worries me. I don't think it's going to, it does worry me who's doing the surveilling and why and what for, and what is that information going to be used for. Again, it goes, the powers of surveillance are really connected to the isms, and the two go hand in hand, and they reinforce each other currently. And I think that's the scary thing, that surveillance is being used to reinforce the broken structures that we already have. So it's big questions.
Yeah, so I really like the look of this top one actually here, saying if we would travel 100 years into the future, what might shamanism look like? That seems to me to kind of just naturally include the cyborg aspect of things, at least given the way technology's been heading. So
what's your answer to that one first then?
I think there's every possibility that there will be close integration of what we currently consider silicon technologies with plant technologies. One project which I think is on your radar as well is wave paths, which is the project of Mendel Kaelin, who was studying he did his PhD in music and psychedelics at Imperial College London. And we're very grateful to him at the Psychedelic Society because he allowed us to use his music on our psychedelic experience retreats, which are the psilocybin assisted retreats in the Netherlands. And now he's working with Brian Eno and Johns Hopkins and some other really distinguished artists to create these. It's a kind of app and a platform, but they're also creating a network of physical spaces. Have you been to one?
No, because there's one in East London, isn't there?
Yeah, I think there was
Yeah.
an experimental one. I didn't get a chance to go either, but I heard good things about it. But as far as I understand, the intention there is really, that at first it's simply it's combining light and music and potentially various forms of therapy, and soon psychedelic therapy, or not just therapy, like experiences with psychedelics. Lisa's just posted a link there, Wave Paths. Yeah, really interesting project of that. Yeah, I mean, it's well known. It's already the case that psychedelic experiences are much enhanced through simply having with some kind of music and a playlist playing. So that's just
that explains a lot of parties, right?
Right, indeed. That's just really seems like it's just scratching the surface. And
yeah.
Another interesting direction I've seen is VR. Both there's projects that are seeking to like simulate psychedelic experiences in VR, and the kind of even the more even more far out one would be like actually combining psychedelics and VR in some way, which maybe it sounds like a good way of totally not.
I think somebody's done that, haven't they? I'm sure. I'm sure a few people have tried. But I mean, as an official experiment, I think that somebody's tried that where they were on acid in a VR headset or something. Yeah.
But so I guess I say this just to say that these worlds are already coming together, and there will be I guess there will be shamans of the future that are very experienced, not only with plant medicines and other let's say indigenous practices, but also the futuristic and the technological, and will be able to weave those together in an utterly skillful and natural way. That is like you, Adah, I don't see a kind of a conflict in these things. It seems the natural progression of things, and within those, of course, there will be people who prefer not to engage in prefer the traditional route and minimize their use of silicon technology, but and vice versa, I guess, as well. But what's your take on that?
I think that what we know as digital and algorithmic technology will be different in 100 years. We won't be able to recognize it, and so if we look at the intentionality of a lot of these things, I think you and I have spoken about this before, that the intention, I suppose this is where Cyborg Shamanism came into being, is that recognizing that the intention of what you're trying to achieve means that you will start to use different tools. I think that what we understand as tech now and shamanism will continue to come together. That some people, to your point, some people will choose to merge those worlds more. Others will choose actually they want to be purists on either side, and that's fine. But I think that the way I'm curious about in 100 years' time, what will we define as technology? What will be the next thing? I don't think any of us can predict that, but I think that whatever it is and whatever form it takes, we will be using it to do the same things. And if we're using it to do the same things, then the future of shamanism is always, I suppose, and I'm thinking on the spot here, but the future of shamanism is always going to be about those three things: connect with ourselves, connect with each other, and connect with the environment, and understanding our relationship with ourselves and the world. And whatever we use to get there is going to probably look very different than it does now.
Yeah, I mean, just to pose a bit of a challenge, because so often us. Well, when I think of the future, as I think many people do, we imagine a kind of technological future because, you know, there's been this great march of silicon technologies over the past decades, so surely it's going to kind of carry on as it is. But just bringing into the field the really dire state of the climate and the kind of and just the current ecological emergency this planet finds itself in, and which could have like incredibly disruptive, all the signs are will have incredibly disruptive effects to all of our lives over the coming decades, which make this kind of march of silicon technologies, I think, kind of far from certain. So that's kind of another possible future for me, looking, you know, those decades ahead, that actually we have no choice but to go back to the kind of the original ways of doing things, and because it's actually, you know, very difficult, very expensive to obtain anything or any of this kind of kit, that in that context, that there hasn't been as much, or that there might not be as much weaving between these technologies as we've just spoken about. Does that conjure anything?
Yes, but I also think that what we're seeing now, it's interesting that people are sometimes using technology to recreate things that we've already got. You know, like in nature. You know the fact that somebody will create a silicon technological tree to try and put more oxygen into the earth, when, you know, into the planet, when we've already got trees. I find that quite an interesting concept. But also, you know, I've met some interesting, you know, thought-provoking people who are trying to use the idea of certain technologies to grow things, to grow new technologies, with, you know, in a petri dish. And so this idea of going back to nature and merging things with nature, maybe you're right. Maybe, well, if we're still around, I mean, it's a horrible thing to say, but if we're still around in 100 years, I hope that we are. I hope that we do change our ways, and, you know, that the planet is still here. But maybe this is part of that journey. Maybe this is part of the time that we do start looking back at, you know, it's what I'm doing, is we do start looking back at the old ways of doing things, and the indigenous ways of doing things, and the natural way of doing things.
I've had an amazing time reading lots of books by indigenous authors over these past sort of 6 months to a year. And one of the ones, a book I've just finished, is called The Falling Sky, Words of a Yanomami Shaman, which I've just put in the Zoom chat box there. And a simple thing, but like that is really emphasized and really, you know, affected me, is the Yanomami consider metal to be a kind of like poison or danger, and it's a danger that can, and more generally anything that is extracted from the crust of the earth. They say that's, you know, it lives down there, and when you take it from its home, then you should expect bad stuff to happen. And it's not like they don't. It's not like a blanket. Never use metal and never take things from the crust of the earth. But Davi, the author, emphasizes like you have to be really mindful that that's what you've done. And if you're not, then they actually associate metal with epidemics, and, you know, and pandemics even, which is really curious of reading this book in these times. And of course, and on first glance, that of course sounds a bit like far-fetched perhaps, but for the Yanomami, it's really very straightforward. It's that there continue to be large numbers of gold miners entering illegally onto Yanomami ancestral lands and bringing with them diseases, most recently coronavirus, that the Yanomami people have no resistance against, and wave after wave of Yanomami people have been wiped out by various, you know, flu viruses and so on, which is heartbreaking to really sort of like read that story. But I think that's I think that's relevant to this discussion, actually, you know, like that there's not I hope that we can, and one aspect of cyborg shamanism, let's say, can be really becoming mindful and aware, and just being really grateful for the technologies that are dependent on resource extraction that bears all kinds of cost, both human and, you know, including through some of the supply chains, but and certainly to the earth. Yeah.
But you know, when you going back to the plant medicine conversation, when you know, when I really saw how everything was connected, you know, everything is connected, then of course you recognizing that you can't just keep taking without there being a consequence. You know, and that's what part of this is recognizing that there's consequences for everything that happens, and if you take, eventually something's going to give. You know, I mean, in the beginning of the coronavirus, I used to not joke, but I used to say, you know, maybe this is the earth just giving us that, putting us on the naughty step, or giving us a shove and saying, you know what, you've taken too much now. Have you read the book Ishmael by Daniel Quinn?
No, I haven't.
Oh,
Will you say a little
you
about it?
definitely need to read that book. It's brilliant. So
Yeah.
it's I read it twice in a row. I just read it and I went, okay, now I need to go back and read it. It's absolutely brilliant because it's a existential conversation between a gorilla and a man about life and about the earth. And humans are the takers. We take and we take and we take and we take. And then eventually there are consequences to that. And it's a beautiful way of, the way that he articulates it is beautiful because it just really gets you to see that that's what we've been doing. And the consequences of that are now happening all, you know, all around the world. And then so the way that I tend to read books, it takes me ages because I'm reading so many books at the same time and looking for the patterns in them. So read that, and then also read The Spell of the Sensuous by David Abraham, and actually reading those two together, because what he's talking about in The Spell of the Sensuous is that it's this animism, you know, understanding that everything has a place and a consciousness and that, you know, and a sense of being, and that we do not exist without the other. So, you know, my phone is only here and it only exists in relation at the moment in relation to me. So, you know, and so it's understanding and recognizing that everything that we see, everything that we are, everything that we do is only because we're having a symbiotic relationship with that. And if we constantly take from the earth and the planet, then something's going to give at some point. Yeah, I'll stick the books in there. I'll stick a link to the books, but something's going to give.
So the kind of animistic worldview that you mentioned, would you say that what's the intersection between cyborg shamanism and animism for you?
They're all connected. So I'm currently reading the book on quantum society. You know, the idea of quantum physics and society and how you create those, you know, those societies. And animism, when you start to really drill down into animism, you start to recognize that it's really connected to ancient African spirituality, Ifa and voodoo and all of those traditions, which is actually quantum physics. It's the same thing. And so if I'm looking at ancient wisdom and indigenous knowledge and quantum physics, then of course animism is part of that, because it's recognizing that everything is connected, and the fact that you have to, or you don't have to. We have choices, of course, but I choose to recognize the connections between those worlds and to look at how can I recognize a pattern in one world that may help me solve a problem in another world. So at the moment, building the ISM network and building the new business, looking at the business models. So what I've done is I've worked out what I think they should be, and then I've gone back to nature, go to biomimicry, to look at how does nature deal with this situation that I'm trying to create. You know, where can I see that pattern in nature? So mycelium networks is one. You know, looking at what happens in how bacteria form social networks, you know, to protect themselves. Now, if we can recognize some of those patterns, you know, and I had some conversations with some VCs from Silicon Valley, about, you know, a new model for money. You know, it's the model that I wanted to use for my business. I said that I wanted to replicate water conservation. I don't want it to be the way that, you know, you've been doing it for years. I want to find a way of replicating what happens in water conservation and use that as my business model for my business. And one of, you know, more than one actually, a few of them said, actually, you're probably onto something, keep going. So I still have conversations with them. They're in a totally different world, but I still have conversations with them about the fact that I'm trying to find the model in nature and then replicate that in how I create a sustainable, fair, fluid system, economic system for what I'm doing.
Yeah, nice, thank you. Just going back to
Thank you, Rosemary, I will do.
The question list here. We kind of started to speak about it, I guess, but we could take it since there's a couple of likes. Could you say how you feel about the wisdom of our elders and tech materials extracted by slave labor, e.g. Antolon and deforestation? Anything more to add to that, Adah?
Could I say about the wisdom of our elders and the tech materials extracted by slave labor? I think the first thing that comes to mind is it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to think about slave labor, you know, the fact that we're even using the word slave, you know, just, it breaks my heart. But there is a lot to be learned and a lot to be respected from the wisdom of our elders, you know, and that's part of going back to the manifesto, the Cyborg Shamanism, the manifesto for women. That's what that was about, that recognizing that there is we seem to have forgotten or chosen to ignore some of that wisdom, and you know it's led us down particular paths, and I just find it, I just find it upsetting that I just find it really upsetting that, you know, that we wouldn't be here without those people and that knowledge and those insights, and you know, they're our ancestors. And one of the questions that I always ask is about what kind of ancestor do you want to be? What kind of ancestors do we want to be? And we can only even think about that because of them, because of their knowledge and their wisdom. And now we're just throwing it away and, you know, chopping things down and deforestation and all these things, and using our fellow human. We've dehumanized people, and they say we, I mean society, has dehumanized people to the point that you don't even recognize them as humans, and we can use the language of slaves. You know, there's this whole colonization. You know, as a species, we colonize everything. You know, so we look at the role of the title futurist. There's people like Elon Musk and all these other, you know, there's a great article in the Boston Chronicle that says "Know Thy Futurist," and you know, I've always said, don't particularly trust Elon Musk. And people say, oh, he's done this and the cars and what have you. I said, you know why I don't trust him? Because if he really believed in this planet and he really believed that that something could be done, he would be investing his money and trying to save here rather than trying to colonize somewhere up there. And that's what upsets me. That, you know, and there's more and more people talking about this, that what is it with the futurists who are trying to colonize other planets, that are trying to upload their brains to the cloud, trying to, you know, cryogenically freeze themselves. It doesn't give me hope that they actually believe that that we're not doomed, and that's heartbreaking to me.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's why I'm pushing ahead with Cyborg Shamanism. You know,
Mm.
it's whenever I start, I start to write a talk or I'm preparing a workshop or what have you, I always go back to the same quote. I've forgotten where it's from now, but the same quote is: "The purpose of a storyteller is not to tell you how to think, but to give you things to think upon." That's
Mm.
all I want to do, is
Mm.
give people the space to think and ask themselves more questions and ask themselves why, and then take action. Because sitting down asking ourselves questions and just doing the work and going and doing plant medicine or technology or whatever and just keep doing that
Mm.
and not actually turning it into something practical that can change things, why?
Mm. It, it it seems to me we've come to um, the point we needed to, in the conversation by coming onto the topic of colonization, actually. And it's worth saying that the kind of the unsustainable kind of extraction of metals and minerals to create tech products, that's actually mirrored in the plant medicine and psychedelic space as well. There's very real concerns about the
Yep.
unsustainable harvest of the ayahuasca vine and peyote cactus on ancestral Wirakuta territory. So it's the same story, and it's just, and
Yeah,
it stems from just that unsatiable appetite to just
well,
consume, and and yeah, not knowing really when is enough. But the question that came to me is, um, how it's, I mean, it's, I mean, it's more of a feeling I'm getting that cyborg shamanism is an inherently decolonizing force and project. I'm wondering like how much of that has been of the concepts of decolonization has been wrapped up in the thinking of the development of that idea.
I didn't know it at the time. I
Mm.
didn't know it at the time. It's only in. I think that that's always been who I am, and that's how I've always seen the world. That when going back to me talking about being as a child the social justice warrior and the injustice of the world. It's just always who I've been, and it's only when I really started this year, really looking into understanding decolonization, what that really means, that I recognized and other people recognize that that's what it is. So
Mm.
I'm currently doing next week is the last week, but I'm doing a 10-week evening course at Goldsmiths in decolonizing anthropology,
Mm-hmm.
which has been fascinating. And it's also been great grounding work for me in asking myself why, and
Mm.
asking myself the questions of, if I'm talking to, if I want to bring back this idea of going back to and understanding ancestral wisdom and indigenous cultures, also making sure that I'm doing it, or I'm doing it for the right reasons, and I'm not doing it so that we can further colonize the knowledge and the wisdom and all of this, because that's already been done. And I don't want to add to that. And so, getting involved in conversations and understanding that this bottom up approach to, and what I mean is this bottom up approach to the knowledge and the help solving problems, we have to do it together rather than coming in, Christopher Columbus style, and going, I've discovered this place and this is what I'm going to do and this is the knowledge I'm going to take and these are the resources I'm going to take. Rather than
Mm.
doing it that way, is working with people to
Mm.
understand. And I think that now that I have a better understanding of decolonization, I think that that is at the core. It
Mm.
is, there's a lot of, I keep saying at the core, there's a lot of things at the core of this, but it's
Mm.
this pot of decolonization and diversity and inclusion and collective intelligence and ancient wisdom and
Mm.
plant systems and all these things that have always just made sense to me.
Mm.
But I've always, up until a point, it was this as an idea, as an individual idea, here. And
Mm.
so my career had been, people from the outside, people say it's quite scatty, but actually I now realize that that was my research process.
Mm. Mm.
The research phase was there. Now I'm into the I've created the hypothesis. Again, everything's an experiment for me. Created a hypothesis, which is Cyborg Shamanism, and now I'm actually looking at how do I start to test that? What are the insights, the data? Who can help? What does that mean? What does that look like? And how does it become a sustainable practice?
So clearly, there's a sort of a powerful manifestation of the instinct for decolonization and a reckoning with race in our society going on right now with the Black Lives Matter protests. And what came to me is what's the interface between cyborg shamanism and Black Lives Matter, right? And one interesting thing I actually mentioned to Sam that's on the call here is just there's a great Facebook page called Queer Nature. Maybe I mentioned this to you as well, Adah, but they post some great content of people of color growing vegetables, being out in beautiful nature spots and so on. But there's also another a podcast I just saw that was released with Bronte Velez, who is talking about how Black wellness is the kind of is one of the most powerful antidotes to the repression that's put onto Black people and people of color in our society. And I have this, it also reminds me of the work of Octavia Butler and Afrofuturism, and I just have this feeling of like expressions of Black people in nature, Black people like in the future and engaging in technology, and also Black people engaging in cyborg shamanism actually is potentially quite an important, could have a cultural project.
I mean, but we were doing it already. It's not anything new. I had a great conversation with a woman who runs an organisation called the Future Architects, the Guild of Future Architects, and she was telling me about she was doing some work with some indigenous elders, but she was doing this VR experience, and she got one of the elders to try on this VR headset, and do this experience, and he took off the headset and he went, "Oh, now you white people understand what we mean when we say that we are levitating and we are going through these experiences. This is what we've been doing all our lives. And now you've got VR technology to help you understand that." And she started laughing, and she went to another event, and another indigenous elder said, "You're now using your technology to understand what we've been doing for years." So the idea of African futurism, or Asian futurism or alternative futurisms, these are not new things. This is why Black Panther was so powerful, because it's not anything that's new. That Black people of color, people from the global South have been involved in these worlds. It's just that the ideas and the knowledge has been colonized and taken and relabeled, and it's what I talk about in the manifesto: relabeled and repackaged and repurposed as something else. But we've been doing it all the time, and more, how many Black people and people of color are prominent in the psychedelic world that you see, that it's not every country, every nation, every country has its own psychedelics, has its own plant medicines. But why is it that it's only particular voices and faces that are seen? It's not that they haven't been done. It's not that they're not doing them. It's why haven't they bubbled to the surface? Why haven't we bubbled to the surface at the same thing?
But I mean, the first thing that comes to mind, sadly, is the war on drugs and just the disproportionate risks that Black people and people of color take by speaking out about their experiences in a way that as a white person, as a man of, you know,
Well, you know, the conversation that we had about
class.
me, you know, the conversation that we had about me doing this talk.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had concerns,
Yeah,
and that's why earlier I was a little bit kind of, you know,
yeah,
because I have to be aware of the fact that as a black woman
yeah.
who is creating some waves and having these conversations in the tech world,
Mm,
there is a perception and there is a, you know, of who I am and what I
mm,
stand for and all of this, and I will get, you know, I could face a different level of onslaught and, you know, criticism and what have you, and things become difficult
mm-hmm.
than, you know, if you were having this conversation with a white woman. It's just fact.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. And but I also think it's incredibly brave and incredibly important that you are having this conversation. And you mentioned Black Panther. Actually, it's funny, I hadn't thought about Black Panther kind of in the context of a conversation before, but that already seems to, it has like heavy kind of cyborg shaman sort of like elements in it. There's actually that scene of like kind of use of some kind of plant medicine, isn't there? I can't remember what it is. It's a mushroom or something like this, or some
Yeah, but
brew, but
but that's what I mean. They're not. It's not anything new. It's just
yeah,
that these, you know, all of these stories are connected, and depending on who tells the story is depending on
yeah,
the level of, you know, the lens through which it is then magnified. And
yeah,
all I'm saying is we need to look back to where these things came from, you know, and who is telling the stories. And now we're all in the space to be able to tell our own stories.
yeah. But and where I was going, that I guess is that you know, it feels like the time to me to show that uh, the engagement of Black people and people of color with these kinds of technologies, cyborg technologies, and also plant medicine technologies, is not simply restricted to film, and does not need to be restricted to film, but is, you know, is here and is everywhere. And like it's been a
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
that's what one of the reasons that it's so exciting to sort of to study your work, just because of who you are. And I'm so excited to see people also like Darren Springer
yeah,
and Camille Barton also like stepping forwards and being very
yeah,
candid about their experiences. I mean, but and in Darren Springer's case, at least, well, I mean, both their case, they're really leading the field. You know, he's actually one of it's like he's one of the UK's top mycologists, you know,
yeah,
and he happens to be Black, and also Camille Barton is, you know, is
yeah.
doing some really excellent work
I
on
was speaking to
the
Camille
woman
the
drug.
other day. You know, I was speaking to Camille the other day. You know, I don't know Darren, but I know Camille.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, you know, her voice needs to be amplified. The stuff that she's doing needs to be amplified, just like Sam. You know, there are people, Samantha Moyo,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there are people that have been people of color who have been in these worlds for a long time and battling to try and be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, now seems like it feels like we're at a tipping point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to use my voice and my influence and, you know, my privilege in some ways and whatever I can do to help bring, you know, those people with me, because, you know, and support each other, because that's what needs to happen. We all need to support each other.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just, you know, we talk about rituals, and it's not just one way of doing things. And when you start to trace back, like I'm doing, when you start to trace back where they come from,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's a heritage and there's stuff that's been lost there.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like hear you on that aspect. It's like, and that's why it's almost, I wonder whether that's been one of the reasons why it's been uncomfortable for, you know, even the psychedelic community to or difficult for the psychedelic community to put people of color to the front in a way, because actually when we do, it's kind of, it just really highlights the aspect of like that, as you said, there's nothing new here, like, and that and
Well,
actually a lot of these in the case of I mean, in the case of plant medicines at least, um, they have overwhelmingly been taken from indigenous cultures,
well, that's the point.
the
Some people put,
the same indigenous cultures which have often suffered for, you
yeah,
know, like, you know, devastation through colonization and through and not least through
I mean,
disease.
I'll give you an example of that, and that's the point. But I'll give you an example. So I'm doing a lot of anti-racism work at the moment, of course. And I speak to organisations, and they say, "Oh, we want to change the system. We want to change all of this, and it's great. We want to get you in to do all this stuff." And I say, "Okay, first conversation we need to have is you do realise that by changing things, some of you white guys on this board are going to have to leave."
Mm.
Because it's going to have to change. And if you want to make the changes that you're talking about, then something is going to, some of you may not be here. And if you understand that, then you can start to change things. Because, the voices and the ideas and the knowledge has been there, but not everybody's been given a fair share, a fair opportunity at this. And when you start to raise those other voices, some people will feel threatened, they will feel divided, they will feel all sorts of anxieties and what have you, But the only way that we can do this, change this, is if everybody plays their part. Everybody has a role to play, and everybody everybody can choose which side of the fence they're on, and if they want to change things, and are they going to. I was having a conversation today about racism. Do you want to do optical allyship where it's just the visual stuff, or are you actually prepared to get your hands dirty and really change things?
Nice.
And the people who've joined the ism network are those people who have said, who are already in their own fields doing that, going in and messing things up and changing things and going, you know what, screw it. There's a different way of doing this.
Nice. It's something that's...
I don't know who that is.
Kalindi. Yeah, so Kalindi was the mentor of Darren Springer, actually, and very well known in the psychedelic community as someone who he spoke at often and at length about his extremely high dose psilocybin mushroom experiences. I think the very memorable quote, he said, we've been talking about combining technology, like including music and psychedelics today, and he said, if you can still hear the music, you haven't taken enough. Which it still makes me smile.
I've heard that. I've heard that. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we can attribute that to Kalindi. So thank you.
I've heard that that there's this thing called breakthrough that is a different world, a different experience.
So thank you.
I have it on good authority that that's what happens.
Yeah. Thank you for invoking Kalindi, John, and Carl. And so I'm just on the ISM site now. So this is like the latest project, really, isn't it? So ism.earth. We'll post the link in the Zoom chat now. And this site was only launched a few weeks ago. There's you can join. There's a join link, and you're invited to fill out a form, which this will take you a couple of hours maybe to
But I like
what I'm saying is that you think about the answers. There's something, an invitation to really think about it.
But this is the point, because so the questions that I ask are, what's your ism? What's the ism that you're tackling? And I've had people say, oh God, I have to go away and look up what the isms are, and people discover new isms, which is great. What are your tools and technologies and rituals for change? What's your hypothesis for change? And what's your vulnerability?
Yeah, I think they're great questions, and I pledge to completing this form and submitting myself for membership of the network over the coming days.
And the membership, the network is growing. The network is actually it will be shaped by the community. So at the moment, it's quite small. But through talking to many of the members so far, recognizing that everybody's trying to find their own ism. They're trying to find or create their own ism and bring those different things together. And the framework that I have, or that I've seen, it is helping some of them to recognize their own isms and maybe bring together a food activist with a jazz musician and a quantum physicist to try and create something new. And it sounds to some it would sound absolutely bonkers. To me, that's like, oh, right, let me roll up my sleeves and get in. This is great.
Yeah.
What can we create from that?
What might emerge from that,
Yeah,
from that configuration, and that's kind of takes back to the beginning of the conversation of saying that seems to me more much better and more easier way in some ways of understanding cyborg shamanism is in seeing the connections between things and sort of taking that step back, which is indeed sort of kind of what you said you've been maybe doing these past months from it. Then at the top of that, actually no, it's at the top of the how page. Where are we? The what page, sorry, cyborg shamanism equals ancient wisdom with new thinking for future innovations for future humans. And this, I really like how that kind of in some way speaks to the arc of this conversation, to how we ended up talking about actually the very simple thing about the planet, care of the planet, being mindful of where the resources are coming from that we're extracting, and indeed being mindful about like the source of this wisdom and understanding that's so often rooted in indigenous cultures and is just stolen and stolen and variously like re-articulated and repackaged. And that's the kind of trickster element for me of cyborg shamanism, is that it kind of it is new. It's a new term, it's been invented recently in July last year. Yet what ultimately it's like, once you start digging around in it, actually you see that it's pointing back to something very old. So I think it quite beautifully combines the old and the new, and I look forward to sort of really seeing like where it's all going to go from here. It's still early days.
So what's next is that I've just been offered a place on a master's in immersive storytelling, which I'm really excited about, and it's so that's at Royal Holloway University. They have a Story Futures Academy, and I've been offered a place there, so I'm just trying to pull everything together. And what my proposal is that it's a studio. They have this amazing lab with 360 cameras and everything, and I'm looking at the intentionality of the technology. So what is the intention of 360 cameras, and how can we trace that back to ancient wisdom? So I've already been able to map that. Actually, thank you, Kat. I've been able to map that back to cave paintings. So cave paintings aren't just things that are, on the walls. A lot of the caves were also acoustic hubs. And so a lot of the paintings were placed strategically so that you have this multi-sensory experience. Well, that's what 360 cameras is. It's creating that multi-dimensional experience. So if I can map that back to there, and then look at the journey from caveman, nature, what have you. It goes back to that question that somebody asked about what was shamanism look like in 100 years. The idea of how have we been telling stories, or what new stories could we tell along that journey, and what would the future of that idea be? How could we create something new from that? So I need to get all the funding together. So I've applied for a scholarship and bits and pieces. I'm going to be doing a fundraiser.
Right, I was just going to say, make sure you let us know about this, and we'll.
I'm putting together they've suggested that I put together a crowdfunder. So I'm doing that, and the way that I'll probably do that is that the crowdfunder will be an immersive experience. So you'll become part of the journey. Of course, storyteller, right?
Amazing. Okay, so I think we might think about wrapping it up soon. I thought it might now be a good time to mention. Well, we've clearly witnessed a brilliant black mind today. Thank you, Adah, for your contributions and the choice of the organisation where the donations for this event are going to is Black Minds Matter, which is, so I'll post the link there, blackmindsmatteruk.com. Their mission is to support in making mental health topics relevant and accessible for Black people in the UK, connecting Black individuals and families with professional mental health services across the UK. I hadn't heard of them before. You pointed them out to me. It sounds like a really excellent organisation. Do you know much about it? Can you say anything more?
No, what I've, with everything that's been going on, I found I think in one of my groups, somebody shared it. And earlier this year, before the lockdown, I was an ambassador for mental health first aid and doing, I was interviewed for podcasts and talking to them about mental health and well-being for people of colour, and especially in the workplace. One of the questions was around what is the impact on the psyche of people who are constantly othered, especially in the work environment in that capacity. And then I found out about Black Minds Matter, who are they are recruiting Black, and I think it's specifically Black, but they're recruiting Black mental health supporters, therapists, to provide a space for Black people to actually go and share their experiences, to get some therapy from people who understand their own existence and the nuances of our existence. Because sometimes, as well-meaning and as wonderful as non-people of colour and some of my relationships are, there's still something that I can explain to another Black woman who will just get it. There are some things that you cannot articulate, you can't communicate in words, because it's about the experience of that. And so that's why I feel that Black Minds Matter UK is really important, especially now, because there's a lot of trauma with what's going on. There's been a lot of trauma, but it's all bubbling to the surface now. And so anything that can, anything that I can do, or we can do to support, to give that extra support, then that's what I want to support. Jamina asked about the crowdfunder. I'm still working on it, but once I do, I'm going to make sure that Stephen gets it, and then hopefully you can send it out in one of your newsletters. Oh,
absolutely.
I thought you froze. You didn't so donate still. Already. I just put you on the spot because you were still, and I went,
oh, I'm sorry,
frozen. No, it was just the, oh God, what's she done?
If you haven't yet donated into signing up to this talk, please do think about going over to the blackmindsmatteruk.com website and clicking donate there. And maybe we'll probably, I guess, why don't we post a follow-up email to this conversation with maybe some interesting links and to some of the things that we've spoken about. And then, because there's a couple of other organizations that are doing really excellent work in the Amazon, for indigenous peoples in the Amazon, which is a kind of topic that we've touched on as well, which might interest some of the people here, and maybe there'll be a few other threads to tie up. But
and I can send some of the links through.
See, any final.
I was saying I can send some of the
links. Please, yeah, go on.
I can send some of the links from my Decolonizing Anthropology course. Some of the ones that I think are really relevant.
Great.
Yeah.
Nice. We'll include links to your website and your Medium and Twitter and so on if people aren't already following those. Any final requests in Zoom chat box? Speak now, or otherwise simply email Adah. Silence. Okay, great. Well, I guess people are satisfied. So Adah, there we go. An amazingly fluid conversation. Great. Well, there you go. A couple of thank yous coming in. Thank you so much for listening, everybody.
Thank you.
And it's been really nice to see your. I might switch to gallery view for a second.
Okay.
So I can see
Actually, I haven't done that either.
Yeah, no, it's fun, isn't it? Like see some faces here. So a lot of people's videos off, understandably, but those of you that we can see, people popping back on. So if you're still,
yes, put your camera on so I can see you.
Phoebe had a great idea actually at another call we did. Yeah, wow. So if you're here, put your video back on still. And we've got at least one full screen of people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, so nice.
Okay, so this is something I only learned recently. So it's like a virtual double high five. So you have to put yourself on gallery view and then put your hands out like this.
Okay.
And we're going to go 3, 2, 1 and then high five. Okay. So 3, 2, 1. Nice. You really felt that, right?
I felt that. I felt it.
Okay.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. It's you know, the conversation had to happen it's been a long time coming, and I'm glad it happened now.
Likewise, and
Yeah.
I'm sure it won't be the last as well.
Oh,
So
no, no, no,
really
definitely
looking
not.
forward to finding more ways of working together over these
Yeah.
coming weeks and months. And um,
Ah, Danielle. Sorry. Now I can see people. I'm like, oh, hi.
friends popping up. Nice. Okay, that's it,
Thank you so
everybody. See
much.
you again. Goodbye. Good night.
Bye.